Hello and welcome to this course. Today I'm going to be speaking to you about podcasts. We're going to cover it from a beginner point of view. I'm going to give you information about the holistic ideas and concepts you need to consider. So if you're thinking about setting up a podcast, you're not sure about how to go about it, what the things are that you need to consider, this course is for you. I'm going to cover a number of aspects. We're going to talk about why a podcast could be a good idea, how you can set up a podcast, what equipment you will need, what software you're going to need, as well as the services that you could think about hosting with for free to get your podcast out there to see if you have an audience. Everything will be covered in this in a straightforward manner. I'm going to cover it and give you the top tips that I use for my podcast and how I found a podcast that I would not have otherwise started actually getting listeners and people are interested in what I want to say and what I have to say. So I want to get you in this boat. If you're not sure, I would say look through this course. The information I share with you will help you to actually start it up. If in doubt, start it, because it's actually free to set up. It'll take a bit of time. You'll invest a bit of time into creating content. If you go through this course, you'll actually know if it is right for you, and you will see how I use that to actually make a plan for a podcast episode to keep it moving. So in later section, you'll see more about that. Let's carry on with the course. The main thing here is going to be, why are you making a podcast? But this needs to be broken down to a few sections. If you understand the reason you're doing a podcast, is going to make the entire process nice and easy. So let's have a quick look at our why. So I'm going to go through this in the way I would think about it. So this should help you. We've got why. Let's get you nice and close onto that there. You can see as I come up with these. So we've got a why. That will mean a number of things. Have you got something you're looking to share? Is that something going to be a regular thing? So in the next section, we're going to talk about the 10 challenge. The 10 challenge will help you a lot with this why. And answer the question. So in either case, if you're doing something as a hobbyist, if you want to share information about something you're looking to make, do, find out about, it might be a good option for a podcast. If you're doing it as a business, will it be a good option to have a podcast? You need to get this into perspective. A podcast will mean you need to do a number of things to get it ready. You're going to have to spend time investing in creating episodes, in editing the episodes, having it ready to be inserted with ads or sponsors if you're looking to make money from it. All of these things, as well as investing the time to look at courses to find out if the podcast software, the services you're going to be using, you might have to pay money for these services. Will it work out for you in the long run? Is your idea to get your name out there, to be an expert in a field? If that's the case, then a why is a good why, because you're looking to share information. That's a quick overview about if you should start a podcast. But next we're going to look at a bit more information about the 10 challenge. Let's check that out. So what is a 10 challenge? The 10 challenge is basically the idea you've got. Can you think of 10 podcast ideas for your podcast that you're thinking about making? List them down. So I could comfortably make 10 podcast episodes about my idea. For example, I already have a podcast, Zulf Talks Photography Podcast, and I could easily talk about, well, let me give you an example. What is the best lens to buy? Is a DSLR camera a good first camera? Which camera should I take on holiday? What is a good camera to use for holiday photos? Should I buy a new camera or look at an old camera? Is a DSLR camera better than a mirrorless camera? What megapixel camera should I get? What is a good lens to buy for starting in photography? Should I buy an expensive camera or a cheap camera? What is the best camera for group photos? That's 10 ideas off the top of my head, which I could build out into episodes, easily 20-30 minutes per episode, and speak about them. So that's my 10 challenge done, because I've come up with 10 specific items I could make. If you got a bigger list, that just helps you confirm that the idea you've got is going to be a good one for a podcast. But don't worry, if you haven't got an idea, I made a full course explaining how to come up with a brand idea or a business idea that you could turn into a brand. And actually, I was able to give you a number of ideas there that helps you make a business or a brand. So make sure you check out that course. But in this one, we're concentrating on podcasts and also how to start a podcast and a number of other things. So we've done the 10 challenge there. Let's have a look at the next section. it's also worth considering, will your idea actually make a good podcast? That's a very good question because not everything can be a podcast. So think about the situation here. If you're listening to something, you want everything given to you by speaking or listening. So if someone is showing a lot of examples of items or doing writing on papers, then that will be something that needs to think about it. So is it always a good idea to go down the podcast route? Not always, because what will happen is if you have something that you're reviewing products, you might have to approach it in a different way for the benefit of the listeners. So we need to consider, if you're talking about products and you're making actual guides, you need to consider your podcast audience. So when you're recording a podcast, make sure you're not saying things like, oh, let's look at this, can you see this, etc., because your audience will be listening to you. So make sure you're tailoring your service in a way that you can make best use of it. So that means giving extra explanation. So actually going into more details. So for example, if I was talking about the best lens for photography, I would say things like, so with the photography lens, I have a number of different lenses that I would use. However, a smaller lens, so for example, the palm of your hand, if you can fit a lens in your palm of your hand, I would consider that a good size lens and smaller. However, if you had to use both hands to pick up a lens, that is going to be a bigger lens. So you'll see I was using more descriptive words, using measurement types of, for example, a hand, double the size, so double hand holding. So this all helps with someone listening. So you want to give a lot more information to help people visualize what you're saying. So this means not everything can make a good podcast, but if it does, you need to use extra descriptive words to help the listener understand you. So that's giving you a bit of a information download about that. Also, it's worth considering what you want to make the podcast about, because when you're making a podcast, you want to consider the topic, the title. Also, we talked about this a bit earlier in terms of branding. If you nail down your brand and you know what you're talking about, try and stick to that relevancy of that item. So for example, if you're making a podcast about talking about films, but then you end up talking about cars, that would be a bit odd. So your audience is going to be get used to what you're actually making. So for example, in my podcast, I talk about photography. So in that remit, we could get away with photography. We can get away with lenses. We can get away with gear relating to photography. For example, the best laptop for your photography editing, the best monitors for photography editing. So in that example, if you keep it relevant, that allows you to make your podcast in the best way for your audience. Because remember, as your audience builds up, they're going to be expecting you to deliver a certain type of podcast. So they're going to be a lot more forgiving if you're sticking to areas that they're interested in. There will be examples where you can make videos outside of that, but you need to test that with your audience. But keep that in mind to keep your focus on the podcast content you're making. So we'll keep that in mind as we go through this course, and you'll see a lot more information. Okay, so next up now, this is going to be the important part of getting it up and running, planning the podcast. So what do we mean by this? This is going to be an interesting one, because you want to consider your podcast as a workflow. Give you a quick example of that. So I'm making a 3-step thing. First thing is going to be, why should they listen to your podcast? So in my planning stage, I've already got my why up here, but why is very important. The topic needs to be interesting and give the listener something that they can get from it, so value. So for example, if I was saying my top 5 lenses that I regularly use, now that could be a nice, interesting option for a podcast, because I'm sharing as a photographer, because if they see the photography, they'll see a number of episodes that I do share. And also as part of that, let me show you quickly what we're saying. Yes, we've got Zulf Talks Photography. You'll see there's a number of episodes, and these actually range from different subjects. So in this example, what is a good camera? What is a pro photography camera? What is the best camera for you? So all of these things are aimed at helping the listener get something from them. So in this example, the why is going to be very important. So that's hooking them in to listen to the podcast, and then you need to deliver on that. So quite early on, you need to mention what you're talking about, what the topic is, and how you're going to help them. So for example, in that example we're using, so I've already done my why, so they're going to come into the episode, and today I'm going to share my best 5 lenses with you, but I'm going to actually let you know why I use these 5 lenses, why one lens is better than the other in different situations, and most importantly, why I use 5 lenses. Why would you not just have one lens that does it all? Well, in this podcast, you're going to hear all that information with tips along the way. So make sure you listen to this, and at any point if you have a question, you can ask me a question in the podcast. There is a section to audio record your question, which I would answer on the next podcast. So you're actually going to get a tailored service from me. That there is the answer. And then last of all, make sure you deliver on that. So once you've mentioned your answers, come back to you and mention, as mentioned earlier, so while you're going through that, make sure to come back to your answer and the why. So when you're coming towards the ending, make sure you close it in a way that your plan works out. So you've asked why are they here, you've answered why they're here, but once they've got what they need, you want to hook them in for the next episode. So remember, when we're talking about subjects, we've already planned 10 ideas and we're planning the episode layout, as it were. So next I'll be saying things like, well, with those 5 lenses that I use, they're really good, but did you know that the camera is as important? Well, in the next episode, we're going to actually be looking at which camera would work best for those 5 lenses that I talked to you about, and also how to make your photos even better. So make sure you listen to the next episode. So see that plan there now? I've hooked them in to already be looked to the next episode, because they'll be like, oh, wait a minute, that sounds interesting. I'm sorted for lenses, but I use X camera. I wonder what camera he's going to be using. I'll make sure to make a mental note to listen to the next episode. So your plan needs to be giving the listener something answered question. Make sure you deliver the answer, and then also give them another option for coming back, because you want to keep them coming back, because the information you're sharing needs to be of value that helps them learn something or make their life better. If you're sharing value, people will always come back and be like, okay, actually I learned something from that guy, I'll come back and listen to him again. So that's a quick plan your episode, and keep that in mind throughout your journey. But next we're going to be looking at additional things like audio, video, and a lot more. So let's have a look at the next section. A big consideration is, are you making a video and an audio file? And are you planning to make your video that you've recorded into a podcast? This is a common thing a lot of people have started doing. So for example, if you're doing a podcast, they'll record a video, but then they'll just rip the audio. What we mean by rip is they'll cut out the audio and keep an MP3 file separately to become a podcast. Is that a good idea? Should you do it? Well, in this section, we're going to cover that and see how it may work and how it may not work. So I've done a number of testing on my podcast, and we've talked about photography being the main topic. And I also do live streaming sessions where I answer questions about photography. So I've actually made those live streams, video live streams, into podcasts to test the waters and see if that helps. So what I do is, keep in mind, if I'm thinking about a podcast designed for video and audio, I make sure, like we mentioned earlier, to keep it descriptive and make sure that everything I'm saying stands on its own merit as an audio file. There's no use me saying, oh yeah, we've got this video that we're looking at, or we're looking at this example on screen, but then people listening would not see that, so they're going to be missing out on something, and that puts people off. They want the best experience. A lot of people with podcasts will tend to listen to them on the way to work while they're doing something else, so that is something that needs additional notice while you're making it. So to answer the question, will a podcast be good as a video recorded into MP3 and put onto a podcast? Possibly, but you need to think about that and design it in your workflow when you're planning your episodes. If you're doing a video, keep in mind that is also going to be used for a podcast, so you're not going to have things that will be irrelevant to the podcast audience. Based on my live streams, I found that the videos that I did were long live streams, so it's probably an hour and 15, hour and 30 minutes, and those into podcasts actually did quite well for me. But that was because a lot of the live stream was valuable information. I had people asking me questions and I was answering the questions on the fly, which actually was good for podcast listeners, because when they're listening to you, they may also have the questions that your audience is asking you, so they're actually getting those answers quite quickly, because they may be thinking about, actually, he talked about a lens, but what sort of price would that lens be? So in chat, you might have someone ask you about, oh, how much is that lens? Why would you buy that lens so expensive? And you're actually answering a question that's come in their mind. So that there are pros and cons of that. You need to plan it. It can work well. There's loads of big podcasts that do video and podcasts, but they're more like they're recording a podcast and the video is secondary. But in yours, if your video is first and then your podcast is a secondary item, it's worth thinking about. It can be done. It'll improve your workflow. You'll get more content, but we need it to be the right content for the right audience. So keep that in mind and try not to dilute what your goal is, which is back to our original why, answer, and hook. So next we're going to look at a little bit about the setting up and planning of the episodes. So let's think about the intros and let's go on to that. So how to record the actual podcast. This will be an interesting one. I'm going to share a few resources with you as well as a free program that I use. You'll notice as I'm speaking now, it's actually in action. So you can see it working its magic. And there I've got a few pops there. So I have to adjust my audio. I've purposely brought that up to let you see how the podcast is being set up there. I can easily stop it and then edit that and add additional effects on it. That is Audacity. You will get a link to that in the resources, so you can check that out. It's a great, simple to use audio editor, recorder. What do they call it? They call it audio software, cross-platform. Audacity is easy to use, multi-track for audio editing. Other people use, there's loads of programs out there you can use. Adobe, you can use loads of products, but this is a free option. If you're starting new, it may be a good option for you to check out. And I use it. I have a macro in there. I'll talk more about this specifically for my voice. I have set up some additional conditions. So when I'm making it and I'm recording the podcast, once I've done it, I'll click a button and it actually gets rid of a number of things for me, which I've made a macro, which I can probably show you. If you're interested in that, let me know. But I think when you're recording and you want software that's easy to use and maintainable, we're going to talk about gear and all of that in a later section, but the recording element of it will help you and that will work well for you. And also I use Audacity in the same way to make intros. So actually, if you have a podcast, you can have a short jingle, a bit of a music, and welcome to Zulf Talks Photography Podcast. In today's episode, or welcome back to the photography episode. You will be looking at a number of photography tips and tricks today. So make sure you keep tuned for You have a bit of music playing in the background. Number of those you can do, but they're basically jingles and things and kind of get people interested. I try and avoid them now because I notice when people listen to my podcast, they'll go and it'll be like they'll listen to one episode and they'll not know that the episode's finished and they'll carry on listening. So at times I've seen in my stats, you can see in the podcast that people will go through like 7 or 8 episodes and they're like an hour each. So that makes me think they're playing them and then they're not, you don't want it to be a clear end. So for example, if I'm talking about lenses, I'll naturally progress on the next episode to cameras. From cameras, I'll go on to tripods. From tripods, I'll go on to lighting, everything that's related. So actually, it could make a standalone large podcast, but they just split out into sections. So think of it like a series where people watch box sets. It's like you're eager to get onto the next box set. So have a little bit of an intermission or something, just saying, oh, next section we're going to be looking at. So try and keep it flowy, because once the episodes are out there, you've recorded them, you've got intros, they can work well for you sometimes, but I've shied away from them on the last few episodes, the last couple of hundred actually. So I've stopped doing those now. I don't like them as much because I want it to be like a continuous thing. So we're not stopping, we're always carrying on to the next section, the next episode. We're looking at cameras now, let's look at lenses, let's look at polarizing filters, all sorts of things. But that's relating to my idea, but obviously your idea may be different to that. But you want to film it in a way, think of it as a wider option. Think about intros, think about endings, but make them more, not really like, oh, we've done today, we finished today. and we'll do another one tomorrow. I'll kind of keep it more flowy. So that's kind of touching on the intros and how to make it sound nicer and more pleasing to someone listening and make them listen longer. What equipment do you need to start podcasting? Well, to be honest, there's not a massive requirement. You'll be lucky that most mobile phones these days with a microphone will work okay. You can actually use a mobile phone. You can get cheap USB microphones that you can plug into your computer and record directly into your computer, into such as Audacity that we talked about. You can actually record it with a camera. If you have a camera, you can record it via the audio of the camera. If it has a microphone port, you can use that. But the main thing here is if you have a mobile phone, you can record into it via an audio recorder as well. So there's loads of little tricks there you can use. So gear wise, you can go expensive, you can go cheap. You need to consider more of a setup where a microphone is being used. In my example, for example here, I have an XLR mic. I have a mic going into a mixing board. The mixing board allows me to adjust levels so I don't have to do any editing later on to my voice. And I do noise suppression and a few little extra filters to make it sound nice, which I'll share with you in my Audacity section of the course, because I use Audacity and there's actually quite a few tips that I can teach you with that. I have a macro which I talked about. You'll see that in the later section. So with this mixing board, it cuts out a lot of the work I would need to do, because I use this live streaming setup as well for my mixing board. So the noise suppression is a lot better, as well as the audio sounds very nice and clear, which means that this professional setup will sound nice. If someone is listening to this podcast with headphones in, you'll hear everything. You need to make sure that it's nice and pleasing to the ear, as well as doing a number of tests. So I have a separate setup for live streaming, so I can actually turn the knobs a certain way, and then I have a separate one for podcasts. So I'll make the podcast a lot nicer. I have a pop filter so it doesn't sound as bad as with poppy things, but on live streams I get away with it. It's not too bad. Some people may connect their phone to their TV or their car and listen to you in like a surround sound situation, so you need to make sure that the gear you're using makes it sound nice. Otherwise it may not sound professional, and people that listen to podcasts, they have a certain expectation of a radio quality, because if they're listening to the radio and then they turn on to a podcast and they see a noticeable downgrade in audio quality, it puts them off a little bit. So where possible, try and make as nice audio system as you can. This will introduce additional things. So it's not only this gear. You might have to have soundproofing in your room, additional acoustic foam panels, and record in a situation where there's not much echo. All these little things will improve your podcast and make it sound even better. We can look at these in individual sections, because I'm going to call this a overall section where we're looking at what you can use in terms of gear. But let's look at a bit more of what guests will expect from you, and also if you're looking to make the podcast, any guests having come onto your podcast. So let's look at that in more detail in the next section. So will you have multiple guests on your show? Because that may be a big factor in your setup. Are you going to have 3 people, 4 people, or are you sticking to just yourself? Because you need to consider this when you're setting up the podcast and also the workflow. You may need an audio interface for microphones. You may need an audio mixer. What's the difference? Audio interface will turn a microphone from one type of lead to another. So for example, if you're recording into your computer has a USB socket. That USB socket can be used for USB microphones. If you get a more professional microphone with a different XLR type connector, you can actually use an audio interface to put the microphone into that, and then that makes that source into a USB into your computer. So think of it like a system that allows you to adapt a microphone. You get better quality with the XLR mic. It has additional power requirements, phantom power, etc. You may already know about this, but we'll talk about this more in the microphone section. Audio mixer allows you to put multiple microphones in and then mix down levels. You could put additional effects in there if you wanted to, but you can actually adjust the mids, the lows, the highs, and set up frequency, additional little setup things that are helpful for different voice types. So if you have a slightly high pitched voice, you can adjust the mixer to give you a nice, more pleasing voice, and vice versa. So that's something to think about there. But also with setting up and mics, it's very important to find the right type for your guests. If you have multiple guests, you want to have microphones that don't overlap. What I mean by that is you don't want to hear this microphone, what you're saying here, in the other person's microphone. So the types of microphones you have are good for that, because a lot of people use a snowball type mics, the big ones, which you kind of pick up from everywhere, so you get a very echoey experience. But if you want individual people speaking as if they're speaking in a radio show, then it will sound nicer if they have individual microphones. And also you need to plan for that in your budgeting and your costing for the mic and also the setup, as well as if you're going to edit these, can you individually edit each person's voice if you need to adjust anything, and are they recording as one file? Everybody's conversation is one file, or are they all individual conversations that can be edited separately? That's all something to keep in mind in terms of using it for guests. So that's kind of helping you with that. Next up, we can look at a bit more information. There's an important consideration. If you're thinking about setting up your podcast, there will be additional requirements for photo editing. So fancy thumbnails, photos, cover arts, those types of situations. So what that means is you will need to have something to allow you to make your podcast stand out a little bit. Let's have a look at an example here. So for example, if I do, okay, let's bring it into the Zulf Talks. Okay, there we go. So if I do a search Zulf Talks, there we go. We got the YouTube, which is the other channel. We've got a podcast here. So what do you see on that podcast? Well, you'll see there, that's the Apple podcast. You've got a banner there, Zulf Talks Photography. But actually, there's additional, where is the, let's have a look at the additional ones. It should be, well, Apple comes up first. But let's do the Anchor version. Anchor. I will talk about podcast hosting services separately. So you can see there's a different thumbnail there for a different podcast episode. So each of the podcast episodes will have a separate, you can see there, that's the main one. And then in the mirrorless DSLR, it's that thumbnail. Then if you go down, you'll see when the Amazon Live ones are not happening, there will be additional different thumbnails for different episodes. So these, let's give me an example of that. So if I go there, you'll see that one there changes down here, which Canon camera to buy. So it's a number of different types of episodes that can have Canon news, a new Canon EOS webcam utility. See that thumbnail there is different. So in this example, what that means is you'll need to have some type of software or editing capabilities to make your thumbnail of the actual episode different for each episode. People are listening to this on their mobile phones, they'll see a little snippet of that picture. So it's like a YouTube thumbnail type situation. If you make it more pleasing, it will help people understand by looking at it that actually, wait a minute, this person's put some time into the episode, the artwork is good, so they can actually have good quality throughout. Because if they're spending time on custom thumbnails for it, they're going to be spending time on audio and all the other things to make the episode nice. So that is covering a little bit about artwork and editing. I think that's quite important to keep an eye on, especially for software. I have got a whole separate course about free photo editing software. So you can actually check that out, which you can see on my courses list. So that'll help you out if you're on a tight budget. And then as you progress, you can look at different options, but it allows you to do the main things that you need to do. You can add photographs in there, you can resize them. It's more or less a Photoshop alternative, but basically free. You'll need to learn, so make sure you check that episode out. But that's covering the artwork for it. But next, like I showed you there, the podcast can be on different types of platforms. Like for example, I have the podcast on Anchor. I have it on a number of sites. You can see it will tell you to listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. What else we got here? Breaker, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify. So it's loads of different places you can put it. But how does that actually work then? So let's look at that next and see which software service you should go with or consider for your podcast recording. Once you've recorded it, where to upload it, who should host it basically. Let's check that out next. Okay, so now we're actually getting to the bit where we decide who's going to be looking after our podcast. So you may have recorded a few episodes, you've got some you're ready to upload. Where do you go next? Well, this is where you decide where you want to host it. There's a few options out there. I'll show you a couple of free ones. We'll also look at paid services and see the difference between them. So in terms of podcasts, what do you want or need from the podcast service? The main thing is going to be, if you have a budget, will it be within your budget? Is it going to be a free option? Do you need to pay for it? How much is it a month? How much limit do you get on bandwidth? Bandwidth refers to, if you have a podcast hosted on the site, how many times can people download it and listen to it or hear that from the server? In addition to that, how much storage do you have? So how many files can you restore on your service? So for example, things like, how big is a file? Normally, podcast of mine an hour will be like a couple of 100 MB, if that, in good quality MP3. Podcast monetization. So if you're looking to make money out of this, will that service allow you to make money from ads, etc.? Can you link your own domain name to it? So for example, could I have my Zulf Talks photography as a domain name and link it to the podcast? Does the service allow that? We can look through some of these. Will it scale? If you start on a free package, will it allow you to scale when you get bigger, when you start getting more people listening to it? So 3 podcast services to consider. Let me show you a few examples so you know what we're talking about. So here is one here. Spreaker is a good option for many people. So you can record it. You can record it on the actual software they provide. You can manage it, distribute it, monetize it, which is a couple of things we said can we do. In addition to that, it's a nice, easy system to manage, and you can see you can organize episodes. You've got access to distribute it on multiple sites. So how that would work is you upload it to their site and they will distribute it to other services. So you're available on most things like Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, Apple. You'll have to adjust and regulate that so you can actually upload it to there, create an iTunes account. That's one. Spreaker. Let's have a look at another one. So Podbean is another good option, and Podbean is one that's used by many people. Let's bring it up. It's again all in one system, and you can get started for free. So that allows you to do that. What I would suggest is, depending on your podcast and your expected audience, spend a bit of time looking through it and seeing if that is going to be the right situation for you in terms of growth. Because if you know you've got a topic that will do well, you want to keep an eye on where you decide to use. And in addition to that, there will also be Anchor. Anchor is the one I use, and there's no real reason I use it. It was free and it allows you to monetize. However, you can only monetize in the US, and there's Anchor. So again, Anchor is a nice, easy option, straightforward to use, and I find it very easy to use. So that's why I used Anchor. It's set up. I've got my podcast set. I've got listeners that listen to my episodes regularly. It can be better if I spend more time on it and make it more tailored to that. But you may know I make a number of courses. I live stream on Amazon. I live stream on LinkedIn. So there's loads of projects around that. So you need to prioritize and make sure you've got the right time and the productivity to put the time in and the effort in for your returns. With this type of situation, a lot of people will wait until it's the perfect moment to start, but just start. That's what I did with mine, and I've already got healthy numbers of visitors and views on my episodes, which I wouldn't have got if I did not start. So I think the main thing here is, if you're thinking about it, start creating episodes, get something out, because straight away people won't find you. It will take time to find you. So as you start loading episodes, you get a bigger bank of episodes. People will find you through search. So that's actually a great option there. A few paid services to consider. I'll show you some of those in the next section. So in case you do have a bit of money and you're looking to get a more professional service and tailor it for listeners for the long term, we'll look at that next. So there are a few additional options out there if you're paying for a podcast, and that would help you to actually use your podcast in a wider variety of ways. You could host it on your service. You can share it on your website. You can monetize it in different ways. You're actually going to own a lot more of the facilities when you're doing it through a paid service, as well as growth and audience, because some of the free packages will have limitations on what you can do and how much audience you have. So let's have a quick look at a few options here. So the first one is Transistor, and this is a publishing platform with analytics, and analytics is going to be very important. A lot of the free options may not give you as detailed information about which episodes are doing well, how much are people listening to them, where are they dropping off, etc. And you have additional players. You can see average downloads per episode, estimated people subscribing to it, as well as trends of listeners. So that's one there from Transistor. We also have Simplecast, who do offer a free trial as part of it, but in the same scenario you can see here, it's used by many big services and you get that flexibility there of additional features and customization. You can see from features and pricing, there's basic options and additional options. So what is the main difference there? You're looking at additional people to sort out your team situation. You've got downloads per month of, well, you can see 50k versus 20k, and you've got 120k. So when you're going to start growing, you want something that can grow with you. So that's why it will help you. The last one I'm showing you here, there's plenty more out there, but I'm giving you a few examples to help you understand. Libsyn is a great one as well. I like their approach to this. They give you straightforward access and additional options for customization, making it nice and easy, and they have got a nice team supporting you as well. So that's none of these are affiliates or anything, so they're just ones that I've seen and I've liked the information they give you and the ease of use. So I thought I'll give you these as examples for you to investigate. Depending on your audience and what you're doing, I started with Anchor. That's where I am now. It's free, it's easy to use. I'm using it to test the water. I did it about a year ago, and slowly I've got growth on there. People are listening to what I'm saying, so that makes me think that is a good idea for me to continue. Sometimes if you're in doubt, do it and see what the results are, and then you'll see how it actually works out for you. So that's a quick look at that. Let's break down the last few things that I promised you in the course, like the microphones and also the software, the Audacity information about how I record it. I'll do you a few little things and show you my screen to share you that information to help you with that. So let's look at that next. So as mentioned, microphones are quite important as part of this, and you may need multiple microphones. So let's have a quick look at the recap on this. I'm going to show you some mics. I'm going to show you the budgets on them, as well as a few options. We talked about interfaces and mixers. Here is an example of an interface. It's basically a little box. It allows you to put your microphone into it. Into the front, you can see you can plug two into this one, and then it allows you to plug that into your computer and control the volume of your mic, the gain, they call it, how high and low it is. That's something you would need for specific microphones that have certain leads. But let's look at a few options. Here is a USB podcast mic. It's called a podcast mic. It's fairly cheap. It's under $30. I've used this in the past, and what I've noticed is when you use it, the microphone is not as good quality. You basically got a lot of background noise, a lot of static, as well as echoing from the room, whereas a different mic of higher quality will sound more professional and nicer. There will be a certain point that you don't need to go overkill, but this one is a bit underkill. So let's give you an example of something that I would use, and let me give you another example of something I wouldn't use. So if you were looking at a budget, this one would be a good option. The Samsung Technologies Q2U I've had and I've used and I've tested. And the best thing about this one is it's actually both. So you can plug it via USB. If you get more professional and you start getting a mixer or interface, you can use the XLR and start using it for XLR powered microphones with additional microphones if you had a team or multiple users. It's a very good mic overall, good bang for buck, under $70, and you can actually see they're using Audacity in the background there in the picture. They're actually using Audacity as well. A lot of people use Audacity. So you can see here, you can plug into a mixer should you need to upgrade and get multiple mics. In that mixer, you can see in the top, it's got 4 slots. So you can put 4 microphones in. So that's a good option. A lot of people use this, and I'm not keen on these. They seem to pick up a lot of noise around you. So if you're probably doing it on a budget and you've got 4 people on a desk, you could probably have that in the middle and all of you could speak into it. Not ideal, but it's better than not having a mic. So in that example, there's a few examples there I showed you for microphones. So I think those would be handy. Consider the prices. You could go really expensive. Let me show you an expensive one. Something like, there's an expensive one. It's not really expensive. It's $247. You can get more expensive than this, sure. There's additional models in this which are very expensive, like the Joe Rogan style ones. But these are things that kind of make you look more professional. If you're doing video, it can look a bit more fancy. So maybe if you want to, show that you've got a really good mic, you can do that. But they did do a lot of testing on some of the Shure mics, and there's a number of cheaper options that sound very similar to the expensive ones. So it depends how professional you're getting and how much money you've got to burn. But that was a quick look at microphones to help you along your journey. So I'm hoping that helps you. I have got a few additional options for software, so make sure to check those out. So as promised, I'm going to actually cover the Audacity workflow that I go through. So this will be a little bonus for you because I wanted to share this with you to show you how easy it can be to record a podcast. So let me take you to my screen and we'll have a look at the software. So you can see here the software setup. There's a few simple things I want to show you. Right here, you can select which microphone you want to use and you can preview the microphone by clicking on this little microphone here. And you can do start monitoring. So you can see there now, my microphone is being monitored and it's actually at a decent rate there. It's not too high, it's going past the green into the yellow, and at some points it's going into the red, but I want it to be a wholesome audio. That's just monitoring it, we're not recording it. So let's click the record button and then it'll start recording. So now what we're doing here is recording a podcast. So say for example, I was talking about cameras and this is my podcast episode. So hello, welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking about a number of podcast ideas. That was a test. So now I know my mic is working and then I will start the proper recording. So let me go and stop that. Stop and I'll close that. So you always want to start with a silent gap. Top tip. Hello and welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking about cameras and photography. I'm going to share the best options with you to help you get the right camera for your budget. Da-di-da-di-da. So that was my example of an episode. So I stopped it. That would be a recording of a podcast episode. I'd move over to the starting and then I'll select all of it and I have tools, apply macro, Zulf talks. So that will do a number of things for me. It automatically adjusted it. Then what I will do is select this gap here where I originally started, and that was a noise cancelling option I'm basically setting up. So I'm going to go effect, noise reduction. Because I selected that, I get the noise profile. Then I select all of it and I do effect, noise reduction, and then I do OK. So that'll get rid of that slight annoying background noise. I'm going to get rid of the starting there by cutting that away. And I can get rid of any additional bits by that. And then I'll export that as an MP3 file. And it's as easy as that to make an episode. Obviously, it would be longer. This was a rushed system here. I will be doing a full walkthrough of Audacity slowly and explaining why things happen, how I set up the macro, what the macro does. So that will help you if you're setting up a podcast, as essential. It's really important to get the audio right. If the audio is right, it sounds very nice. And as mentioned in this course, you want it to sound radio quality, if not better. So that's a quick deep dive into Audacity and how I use it. I'm hoping that helps you in your setup, but you'll do great things. Make sure you start recording your podcast. Thanks for joining me on this. I'm glad you finished this course. Well done and congratulations, you've passed the course. Next up, you can actually look at some additional courses that I've set up for you to help you around what we talked about in this course originally. Branding is very important. If you don't have a brand, if you don't have an idea, if you've got no idea about what you should start your podcast about, that course that I designed, you need to check out. It basically helps you find ideas that you already have in your mind that you did not think could be a brand or a business. So that'll actually break it down in a way and let you know how I come up with ideas for different types of genres, different types of things that I already do in my life that would make great brands, ideas, or businesses. So that would be something to check out. In addition to that, if you found the course helpful, you can leave a rating and you do have access to questions with me directly. So you can actually pose a question and I will get back to you and help you through your journey. There's a number of resources available in the course, so make sure to download those and check the links out where I'll show you the microphones that I looked at, for example. So best of luck on your next course, and I'm going to see you on my next course.